One. Hello, Bree. Welcome to All Ears English. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Lindsay?
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce you, and then we will get into today's interview. So,
Okay.
listeners, today I have Bree Aesie on the show. Bree is the co founder of AC English School in Barcelona, where she uses her psychology background to help students reach fluency. Bree also hosts the podcast Into the Story, where listeners learn English through inspiring true stories. Love that, Bree. I
Mhm.
love the format of your show, by the way.
Yeah, it's really fun. Your listeners will be able to listen to a story that you, in fact, tell on the story, a true inspiring story.
My
And yeah,
vulnerable experience. Yeah,
it's a lot of
yeah.
fun to listen to stories from people all over the world. So yeah, we
It's
like it.
glad to have you here. Thank you for coming on the show. Today, Bree, we're going to be getting into the topic with you of how we can harness our emotional brain and just our emotions to learn English better, faster, and more effectively, right? That's what we're looking for. That's why we're here. Bree, how did you get into being interested and becoming a psychologist or studying psychology? Where did
Yeah.
you, how did you get into it?
Where
Yeah.
did that come from? That's a great
Yes.
question. I think, well, I know that it just came from being interested in people, being interested in the way the mind works. So I
Hmm.
think quite, naively as an 18-year-old choosing my major in university, and I went into psychology. And
Yeah.
I loved university. I loved studying psychology. I know that
Ah,
you also
I
studied
did.
psychology,
Yes.
so we
Yes.
have something in common there. Did you
We
enjoy
do.
your degree?
I really had fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Mhm.
This was a long time ago, an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I remember studying everything from criminal psych to social psych to, oh my gosh, learning and cognition, all these different things, right? So psychology spans so many areas. That's the cool thing about psych.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
and it affects a lot of different things, and one of those things is emotions, which we're going to
Yes.
speak about
Yeah.
today.
Just one question before we get into emotions. Have you found over the last number of years that the world is kind of coming around to being interested, more interested in emotions, not just when it comes to learning languages, but just are we coming to a place where we're okay to talk about emotions in the brain and the way psychology works? Are you
Yeah.
seeing a shift there or
Oh,
not as much? Yeah.
absolutely. I think, I've definitely seen a shift just this past few years in speaking not
Hmm.
only about, mental health, anxiety, of course, this
Yeah.
generalized anxiety that a lot of people are experiencing and also talking about now.
Mm.
Um, and also another kind of side, which is this concept of mindfulness and being present and being more
Hmm.
aware of our minds and what they're doing at all times because they never
Yes.
stop. They're always going, they're always telling you things, right? So
That's right.
yeah, I've definitely absolutely seen a shift in
Okay, so
that.
that's exciting. And so we can apply that to language learning as well. So let's get into kind of the details of what we're going to talk about today. When it comes to the brain, it's the great enigma, right? The thing, it's like the thing that if we understand it, if we understand our emotions and our brain, we can kind of harness it in the right direction. But it's about understanding how it all works. So, what specifically are you going to show our listeners on today's episode, Bree?
Well, I think what I would like to show is that your emotions are very important. And I
Yeah.
think all of us know this. And when we think about emotions or when we hear the word emotions or to be emotional, maybe we have a certain idea.
Right.
But in fact, emotions affect everything. And
Yes.
they not only affect everything, the way that each of us experiences the world is different. And a
Hmm.
big part of that is due to our emotions. It's due to the way
Yeah.
we feel about our world.
Interesting, right? So maybe people think of emotions, they think of just like being overly emotional,
Yeah.
crying too
Crying.
much, or being
Exactly.
angry. And
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that most people can only name like three or four basic emotions, that we don't necessarily have a vocabulary yet or an ability to dig into the subtle nuances of different emotions and what they are. There's so
Mhm.
many of them, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And specifically for me in my own language learning journey, so I started learning Spanish 13 years ago when I moved to Barcelona from Canada. That
Hmm.
wasn't like something we spoke about in class. Nobody ever was saying like, "Okay, you're going to be really uncomfortable," or
Yeah.
there just wasn't. There was no vocabulary for that.
Yeah.
So But in fact, so why are emotions important for learning? Well, we know that they affect three very, very key things. And we can use the
Mhm.
acronym MAM, M-A-M. So this
Okay.
is motivation,
Mhm.
attention,
Okay.
and memory.
Okay.
Okay. So our emotions influence our motivation for doing what we do. Okay. Also, the
Mhm.
attention that we give or we do not
Mm.
give to a certain task. And emotions even affect our memory. So, emotions, especially feeling positive emotions, can make us remember things better. So, this is obviously extremely important for learning a language.
Absolutely. I think a lot of our listeners probably feel like they learn new things all the time, but it just kind of comes in and then goes out and then it's gone, or they're not
Mm,
able to pull up that word when it's in the moment of the connection moment, the conversation when it's
yes.
needed or at work.
Yes.
They're just not. So maybe this will offer us some keys today into how we can actually retain what we're learning and really internalize it and use it for that connection. So I think today you have three key tips that you were going to share with us today, Bree. Can we go
Yes.
into number one? Are you ready for it?
What I wanted to do before number one is just talk a little bit about our brain.
All
Can we
right,
do
let's
that?
do
Can
it.
we like pull it
Yes.
back to like
Tell us
Psych
about the brain.
101, Lindsay and Bree? Okay. So
Going
we
back to
have
the early days. Yes, let's do
early
it.
days, go way back, way back. So most of us feel emotion in our bodies, right? Like I
Mhm.
feel emotion in my heart. I have this little picture.
Yes.
I have this picture here that my son drew me yesterday. Let me illustrate my point. Can you see this?
Oh, again. Yeah, I can
Okay,
see
so
that.
there's like a person, there's two people, there's me, and right there, there's a heart. That's me. So I feel emotion in my heart. I feel it in my
Mm,
chest. Okay, so
mhm.
a lot of people say about feeling it in their chest or feeling it in their belly, but we know that in fact our brain is the control center of all of our emotions. And there's a part
Right.
of the brain called the emotional brain. This is the
Mhm.
limbic system, which is different structures, including like the amygdala, the
Yep.
hippocampus, the hypothalamus. All of these are controlling emotions,
Sure.
okay, including our heart rate. So, this is why we feel emotion in the heart. And
Mhm.
another name for the emotional brain is also the primitive brain, and it's or
Mm.
the animal brain. So, it's responsible for our very instinctive behaviors. So, things that we
Mhm.
do for basic survival. So, this
Okay.
is can kind of sound a bit scary, right? So, emotions are controlling us all day. Emotions are
Yes.
controlled by our primitive brain.
Absolutely. This is the brain that told us to run from the tiger, right? This is the
Exactly.
amygdala. This is the thing. This is what's kept
Exactly.
us alive over centuries and centuries and centuries,
Mhm.
millions of years. It's the reason humans exist.
Exactly. So
Yes.
this sounds a bit scary. So we're being controlled by this primitive brain if we're being controlled by our
Yes.
emotions. However, we have something that's called the prefrontal cortex. So the front brain, that thing that would the part of the brain that would be right behind your forehead if you touch your forehead.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yesterday I went to the science center here in Barcelona. It's called Cosmo Casha. It's amazing. It was so fun.
Ooh.
Went with my two little kids.
Hmm.
And we saw an exhibit, and there were all these brains with different sizes, right? And we see, of course, that our brains have gotten bigger and bigger. And why have they gotten bigger? Well, we know that we are much better than our ancestors at making smart choices, at
Mhm.
planning for the future, and
Mhm.
controlling our emotions.
Mhm.
So we use our prefrontal cortex to control our emotions. And by controlling our emotions, we can improve our motivation, our attention, and our memory. So of course this helps
Yes.
us learn language. So that's the Psych 101, the way the
Uh-huh.
brain's working, evolutionary psychology, all of that. We
Yeah.
see that emotions are very important.
So you're kind of saying that evolution has brought us to the place where we're poised to take it to the next level, right? And are you saying that the prefrontal cortex has actually gotten bigger? So we say the brain, do you mean specifically that region has gotten bigger and the amygdala has kind of gotten smaller, or do you
I
mean just
believe
broadly the mass of the brain
the
in the
mass
human
of
body?
the mass of the brain, but we do know specifically that the prefrontal cortex has become more and more developed.
Yeah.
And this concept of symbolic thought and thinking about the future and
Mhm. Mhm.
thinking about
Yes.
ourselves, self-awareness,
Yes.
right? So that
Yes.
I'm my, my body is separate from the outside world, and also thinking about our thinking.
Oof.
How many times I know that you're also a practitioner of yoga or
Yes.
of meditation. I'm not sure about
Meditation.
yoga.
Yeah.
So this concept of watching the mind and what it's doing, and it's like
Mm.
jumping all around and hey, feel good about this or feel bad about this or what do you have
Yeah.
to do? there, what happened before. So this concept of being able to think about our thinking, this is kind of what's been developed over this last 40 years since we were,
Yeah.
or 40,000 years since we were living in caves.
40,000 and then the recent 40 having a surge. Have you read anything by Rick Hansen? He's a neuroscientist that goes into mindfulness quite a bit. Have you read anything by
I
him?
haven't. Rick
I
Hansen.
recommend his
Okay.
stuff. He's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so
Amazing.
this is
Okay.
what I'm taking away from what you're saying here, Bree, is like I said, we're poised. We have gone through generations and millions of years of evolution, and we're at the point where we can do so much as humans. Our brains are ready for it. It's just a simple matter of understanding how to harness it a little bit,
Mhm. Exactly.
moving our attention in certain directions. So, with that in mind, I think we're now ready to go into your tips, Bree.
Yes. Yes.
Let's go into that first tip so we know exactly what we can do. We know the theory now. Now, what do we do to put this into action?
Okay. So, how can you use this in a very practical way? So, my first tip is to stop trying so hard. Okay?
Love that.
Stop trying so hard. So, of course, to learn a language, you need to take time. Okay? So, for some of us, for a lot of us, that requires a lot of effort, right? So, we need to
Hmm.
make time in our day. But once you're there, once you hit play, once you open the book, once you open the app, just stop trying so hard. Just
Yes.
try to approach it as a child would. And I know that we hear this a lot in language learning, just learn like a child, but I don't mean it in that way, but I mean it more in the way of be curious, like
Yeah.
truly curious about what is this podcast talking about? How much
Hmm.
can I understand? What does that word mean? And when we are truly just open and curious about experiencing a language, it
Hmm.
is so enjoyable.
Oh,
Okay?
100%.
Exactly.
Yes.
So this is just being present and getting out of your head and going to the state of being curious. It's very
Yeah.
it's very similar to meditation and yoga and any other
Mhm.
mindfulness practice, right?
Yeah. How do we undo and then I wanna move on to the next tip, but I have a side question here. How do we I think a lot of times our listeners are coming into English with the opposite of that, with a clenched mind. Like, their mind looks like my hands right now, "Arr,"
Yeah.
right? And I think a lot of it is because the way that we've learned English growing up, right? And memorization in
Mm,
classrooms. I know when I learned French in high school, it was traumatizing,
yeah.
having to go up on the board and being berated because I got it wrong. How do we then erase that and totally approach it with a new mindset? How do we do it? Right? How do we do it?
I think
Is it
that the only way to do it is a little bit of thought and planning, so using that
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex, that place that
Mhm.
we've developed of approaching it as, "I am going to be curious. I am not
Yes.
going to." When you go to the gym, if you flex too hard, if you use your muscles too hard, it's not
Right.
enjoyable. You're in pain the next day. Whereas if you are curious, then this positive emotion of curiosity can lead to more positive emotions like enthusiasm and then satisfaction. And this kind of creates this positive feedback loop of motivation for language learning. So you
Mm.
listen to All Ears English and it's
Mhm.
interesting and you feel
Mhm.
curious and
Mhm.
Lindsay is super enthusiastic. And then you feel enthusiastic and satisfied. And then the next
Right.
time you become more motivated to listen again and you
Yeah.
do it more often and you learn more. So all of this begins at, like you say, I know that a lot of us kind of have a bit of trauma about maybe learning a language in high school or even learning now, but just kind of trying to put that away, take that
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
box of emotion, of bad emotion, and put it on a shelf, leave
Mhm.
it there, and
For
say,
sure.
my only thing to do now is to feel curious, to feel playful, to
Yeah.
feel open, and that's
Yeah.
the first tip.
I love that. It's a relaxing into it, and I think you're right. You hit on the right choice of materials. Choosing material that feels a little bit more like entertainment, maybe. Right? Like
Mm,
then we get into kind of I'm being entertained. It's not so much I have to learn. It's not a textbook. It's entertainment, and it becomes edutainment. Right?
exactly, and
So
that's the next tip. So the
let's get into it,
next
Brie. Let's
tip
get into it.
is to find what feels good, okay?
Perfect.
So finding what feels good is exactly what you've just said. It
Hmm.
is finding a place that you feel entertained, finding a place
Mm.
that you feel curious, finding a place that is giving you good vibes. Okay. And this
Yes.
can be very personal to you.
Yes.
Because for me, when I was learning way back at the beginning of my language learning journey with Spanish, what I enjoyed, and I was having a
Mhm.
conversation with another teacher and podcaster the other day about this, what I enjoyed was listening to a it was like a telenovela, so it was like a soap opera
Oh,
with
fun.
fictional characters, and I loved this. But for him, when he was learning Japanese, he loved making lists. For me, that's a nightmare,
Hmm.
right? He loved
Oh,
making lists of the Japanese characters, but he enjoyed that. So this thing is going to be absolutely personal to you. And
yes.
and when we feel good, our brain is going to release these neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin and endorphins and
Yes.
hormones like oxytocin. And this actually, when we release these hormones, these feel good hormones, these things help us remember more.
Mhm.
Does that make
Love that.
sense?
100%.
Yeah. So
100%.
like,
Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So when we connect information to emotion, we
Yes.
remember it more easily.
Yes, the brain becomes much more of a sponge, right, to
Yeah.
absorb. I definitely identify with this. When we're truly engaged, we
Yeah.
don't have to be physically in the moment. We don't have to be in the country having the conversation. We can just be listening to a podcast or a show, but we are alive. Our brain is absorbing what we're taking in. The other good piece of this is that those chemicals are also what forms habits, right? And so then we form a
Yes.
good habit, and we're coming
Exactly.
back to that piece of edutainment on a
Mhm.
daily basis or weekly basis. That's going to get us in the right habit loop. I love it. So
Exactly.
find material that makes you feel good. And at the end of our interview here, I'm going to ask you a bit more about your show, Brees. You could tell us about your style
Yeah.
on your podcast. But let's go into your third tip here.
Okay. Okay, so we're being curious, we're finding what feels good. Now, before the third tip, I'm just going to point something out here about language learning. So, in language learning, we know that we have passive tasks like
Hmm.
listening and reading, where you're mainly receiving information. And then we have the active tasks like speaking and writing. This is where you're actually producing language. Now, from my experience, 95% of the students that I've taught and the people I have spoken to, they like to spend more time in the passive. Okay. They
Yes,
feel comfortable in the passive.
of
But
course.
in order to become fluent, and for me, my definition of fluency, it can be different for different people, but my definition would be understanding English and being
Hmm.
understood when you speak it. Okay.
Yes.
So if you're going to be fluent, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time in the active.
Hmm.
But what's the problem? Why are people avoiding the active? Maybe it's opportunity, but I
Hmm.
would say it's because it's uncomfortable.
For
It's
sure.
uncomfortable to
Of
speak.
course, of course, and we've all felt this in second, third languages that we've learned, right, Bree? For sure.
Oh my goodness. I'm not even going to tell you about my terror of being terrified to use Spanish for the first 3 years. I feel very
Ah,
ashamed to say
interesting.
that,
You mean
but
when you were living in Barcelona?
when I was living
Or
here, when I was living
yeah.
here, if someone had just taken me, pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Bree, it's normal for you to feel terrified. It's normal for you to feel uncomfortable." And that would have helped me so much to understand that. So
Interesting.
going back to the science center yesterday that I went with my kids. So we're looking at the skulls, right? We're looking at how the brain has grown. Now,
Mhm,
next to these brains, there's
mhm,
another exhibit that my 2-year-old was like amazed by. He just was staring at it. He stood there for 5 minutes. Was two wax figures that looked very realistic of
okay,
these humans or Neanderthals, probably.
right,
One is holding a spear. A spear is
okay,
like a long stick with a sharp end, and the
right.
other one is laying on the ground dead.
Uh-huh.
So this is a world that we do not live in anymore, right?
Of course, yeah,
This is a
yeah,
world that most of us do not live in anymore.
right,
So there was a time in our evolution, when we needed to be understood and we needed to
mhm,
understand to be safe. Because
mhm,
if we weren't accepted by the group, it was a matter of life and death. So this
yes,
feeling of fear and anxiety when we're speaking our second or third language, this fear of speaking English is kind of our brain's very old instinct to help us
right.
fit in, to be a part of the group, to adapt to new
Mhm.
environments and to stay safe. but
Right.
it doesn't serve us anymore. We don't live in this world anymore. We don't live in a world where we need to be fearful if we say the wrong thing, or I should say most of us don't.
100%. Yeah, I love the
Mhm.
idea of thanking our brain for trying to protect us, but being a little misguided, thinking that,
Yes.
the brain is still millions of years backwards in history and then moving forward anyways, right? Bree,
Yes.
so what's the tip here? What are we doing? We're just getting uncomfortable. Is that right? We're taking action. We're actually speaking. Is that what we want to
Yes.
do? Yeah.
Yes. It's the I mean, me as a person who I have gone through a lot of fear and discomfort and anxiety about speaking, and my
Uh-huh.
husband being the opposite end of the spectrum of someone who like just he's on Duolingo learning Indonesian and French and he'll practice with anyone. We've had
That's
this
amazing.
conversation. It is amazing. But he also says it. He's like, you just have to not care. You have to be
Right.
okay being uncomfortable. You have to
Yeah.
stop trying to control the way the other person receives you, the other way
Mm,
the other person sees you, and be okay making mistakes and be okay being uncomfortable. So just get comfortable being uncomfortable. There's no way around it. I wish there was like a magic pill, but there's not.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that tip. Get comfortable
Mhm.
being uncomfortable. The truth is, even if we think we are speaking very, very well and we're doing a great job with our English, we don't know what the other person is thinking, right? We can't evaluate our success based on what other people think. I mean, that sounds like what we're getting at here, Bree. Instead, we
Yeah.
just have to go in and communicate and do our best to connect. Is that right? Is that what we're saying here?
That's exactly what we're saying. And I would go further to say that most likely nobody cares.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, it's kind of sad in a way, but it's something that people have said to me over the years in different domains of my life, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Nobody cares. Like, why
Nobody
do you
cares.
care?
And
So just get over it."
they're probably wrapped up in themselves, how they're
Exactly.
coming off most of the time,
Yes.
so they don't have the brain space to pick out your every mistake or hesitation.
Mhm.
I love this. These tips feel expansive, they feel smart, and I think humanity is at a place where we're ready to take on these tips and really be smart, use the gains we've made in the prefrontal cortex to go even further, right? It's
Yeah.
like we're using what we've gained to make that next leap into
Exactly.
advancing and becoming fluent and having connection around the world. I love it. Bree, can you tell us about your about the style of your show and what you're doing over there on Into the Story? Is that the name of it? Into
That's
the
right.
Story? Love it. Tell
Into
us
the
about it.
story. Yeah, absolutely. So we use true stories to immerse our listeners in inspiring experiences that people have lived. And in this way, of course, when we listen to a true story, we feel emotions, we feel good, or if the story is scary or anxiety producing, you feel those emotions as well. And we believe it's a wonderful way not only to gain more fluency and remember new vocabulary, but also to connect with people from different backgrounds and diverse, world experiences.
I love it. It's very
Mhm.
unique. I don't know of
Thank you.
any other show that has that format, and I love story. I mean, we love storytelling. It's one of the things that humanity has done for millions of years is tell
Mhm.
stories. And so there is something powerful there. So I want to encourage our listeners, guys, go on over, find Bree's podcast, Into the Story, and hit follow and listen to her show. Good stuff. Thanks for being on the show on All Ears English today, Bree, and we hope to have you on again soon.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It was an absolute pleasure to speak about this with you. And yeah, we'll catch up soon.
For sure. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.